The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Israel held elections yesterday, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel won a clear victory in the elections. Almost certainly will be forming a new government, serving a fourth term. He offended many and alienated many others in the process. With 99.5% of the votes counted, Ynet has reported that the Likud party captured 29 or 30 of the 120 seats in parliament, and this got Benjamin Netanyahu past his chief rival from the Zionist Union Alliance, which got 24 seats. It seemed like it was closer earlier on. I was monitoring the progress of the elections earlier on in the evening. Seemed like it was much closer, and ultimately a relatively decisive victory for the prime minister, who will remain prime minister. And right before the elections, Benjamin Netanyahu went even harder right, if that's possible to imagine, saying that if he were to be elected again, a Palestinian state would not be created. This just happens to directly contradict what he said back in 2009 in a speech where he actually voiced some support for the principle of a two-state solution, two states for two peoples. However, now saying if he is reelected, which he has been, there will be no Palestinian state, certainly an appeal to the rightest of the right in Israel. And my reaction when he said this was, yes, I know. It's very unlikely that there will be any serious discussions towards a two-state solution under Netanyahu. Not a surprise.
It seemed like right before the election or in the weeks leading up to it, that some of his opposition actually had a chance.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any way that there is something shady happening here?
I got a couple of emails saying, oh, what a surprise. It's so close. Everybody seems to hate Netanyahu, and all of a sudden he wins like this. I don't think so. I talk to a lot of people who live in Israel. I talked to my brother, former TV director Natan, who is currently getting his master's degree in Israel, and talking to people. There are many people who are not actively demonstrating, but are just kind of saying, you know, I don't love him, but I think I'm just going to end up sticking with Netanyahu. And those groups, combined with the fact that it's a coalition with also this kind of extreme right-wing element of the Israeli Knesset, all of that together ended up with a re-election for him.
I think this is a good example of how the power of incumbency is very prominent, not only in the United States, but really all over the world.
Yeah, people who are kind of lukewarm, just saying, you know, I'm not really ready to replace him with other people who may not even, we don't have proof that they can do the job. So I guess I'll stick with the guy I don't love, but at least has kept me safe.
Yeah, I think that's the easy thing to do. And we are both not happy to hear this news.
No, I think that the chances of real progress on peace now that Benjamin Netanyahu has been reelected are quite low. And we'll talk about this more later on. Luke Vargas is going to join us actually from Jerusalem a little bit later in the show, and we'll talk to him about the details there. So the FCC has now released the full text of the new net neutrality regulations. And as we talked about when we announced the decision to regulate broadband and mobile broadband under Title II, there are many great things in these regulations, and there are still some uncertainties. So most of the document is actually not about what most people consider issues of net neutrality. A lot of the document deals with uncommon scenarios, clarifying some specific legal matters, and so on and so forth. The parts about what you and I have been speaking of so much with regard to net neutrality, fast lanes, paid prioritization, what else? Throttling. Those parts are actually relatively short. And the document does make it clear that broadband providers are going to be classified under Title II. They aren't going to be subject to all of the same regulations as, for example, phone companies, which are also regulated under Title II. Because the regulations, the text says, quote, only those Title II provisions found to directly further the public interest in an open internet and more, better, and open broadband will be applied to these broadband companies. So this is quite subjective and open to interpretation. It's under Title II. Broadband and mobile broadband are under Title II, Lewis, but only the provisions of Title II that we think are most relevant to furthering the public interest are actually going to be applied it leaves quite a bit of wiggle room.
I think that was probably intentional.
Yeah.
Rather than there just being not a really a firm understanding of what's happening here. I think, the language has been so vague all along.
And we have some specific language with regard to things like blocking and throttling. So section 8.5 says, no blocking. A person engaged in the provision of broadband internet access service, insofar as such person is so engaged, shall not block lawful content, applications, services, or non-harmful devices. That's good. The caveat there is, what if certain things are made non-lawful? That is still something we discuss, which is if you want to block torrents or if you want to block particular platforms or types of content, you can make it unlawful, and then the internet service provider actually would have no issue whatsoever with legally blocking that content. Section 8.7 is no throttling. A person engaged in the provision of broadband internet service shall not impair or degrade lawful internet traffic on the basis of internet content. Again, lawful being that key word which some legal experts say could be used to throttle or to block. And section 8.9, no paid prioritization. A person engaged in the provision of broadband internet service shall not engage in paid prioritization. That one is quite clear.
That one is very clear, yeah, and I think that one makes sense. Doesn't mean it still can't happen behind the scenes. You never really know.
No, but I think that we have to agree that even with these caveats of what can be made unlawful, there are good things here, and this is, even though it may contain some potential steps backwards, this still contains several steps forward in a good direction.
It does. It's a good thing, and I hope that the FCC will actively oversee this and make sure that this is properly enforced. Because if they just write the laws and then sit back and do nothing, there will be some of this stuff happening.
In the midst of the controversy in Argentina involving the death of prosecutor Alberto Nisman and these allegations that there were possible quid pro quo deals on the table between the administration of President Cristina Kirchner and Iran to prevent a full investigation into Iran's involvement in the 1994 Jewish Community Center bombing in Argentina, there has been an accusation of another link between President Kirchner and Iran. Argentina has long accused the Iranian government of directing that 1994 bombing of the AMIA Jewish Center, and also accused the Lebanon-based terror group Hezbollah of carrying out the attacks, but no arrests have been made. And there have been 6 Iranians on the Interpol most wanted list since 2007 in connection with the bombing. And if true, this is a blockbuster. The Brazilian magazine Veja reported that Iran actually financed the 2007 presidential campaign of the now president Cristina Kirchner in exchange for impunity for the Iranians allegedly involved in that AMIA bombing, according to the magazine's report. Now, if true, this is absolutely revolting, corrupt, and sickening. The same report from Brazil says that the deal was brokered by Venezuela's Hugo Chavez and also provided the Iranians with nuclear know-how. So I have many thoughts on this. On the one hand, there are many countries trying to prevent the belligerent Iranian regime from obtaining nuclear weapons, and Argentina's president reportedly, according to this story, was party to a deal along with Venezuela's Hugo Chavez to help them get the know-how they need to produce nukes. At the same time, who is the source of these claims? The source of these claims are former intelligence officials from Venezuela. And we have to always be, I don't know that the term skeptical is the best term, but we have to certainly trust but verify when it comes to deserters or turncoats from intelligence agencies, because by their very nature, these are sort of anonymous sources.
I mean, if I told you that this story was written by a Brazilian magazine based on Venezuelan intelligence agents about the Argentine administration being funded by Iran, you would think to yourself, you know what, I need more information.
Absolutely. And I was actually, a cousin of mine from Argentina was in town this morning, and we went out to breakfast and we were talking about this. And he said, the thing is, Living in Argentina for all these years and being familiar with the Kirchner administration, nothing about what's in this report is at all shocking or surprising. It's all perfectly believable. At the same time, because our sources are disaffected Venezuelan former intelligence agents, we have to wait for something else before really considering it accurate by the very nature of who we're getting the data from.
And this is a huge story, and it's really interesting, and I'm sure everyone wants to read about it, and maybe that's why, it could have been trumped up a bit by this magazine, because they seem to be the first one breaking this type of news.
We will continue to follow it and see what comes of it. That Christian Republican I told you about, Justin Harris, who gave his kids to an alleged rapist, has resigned from numerous committees that he's on, or at least from leadership positions. This is Arkansas Congressman Justin Harris. He adopted 2 young girls, gave 2 of them away to someone who taught at the Christian preschool that he owns, and that guy reportedly raped the 6-year-old. And after the scandal began, Justin Harris claimed that he was actually the victim in all this because he said the Department of Human Services never told him about the psychological issues that the girls had, and that they wouldn't return his calls either. Both claims that the DHS completely denies. Then, and I think you were on vacation, Lewis, already when I reported this, then it was revealed that Justin Harris had an exorcism done on the girl that was allegedly later raped. And now, according to the Arkansas House of Representatives, Justin Harris has stepped down as vice chair of the Aging, Children, and Youth Committee. And this is effective immediately. He is going to stay on as a committee member. He's also going to step down from the Joint Performance Review Committee. I'm finding myself more or less unmoved by him making these moves within committee. This is a guy who should resign altogether, and he should be lucky if he doesn't end up with criminal charges.
I hope he does. This guy is a total freak, and stepping down from the committees isn't enough. This guy should not be holding any office. I don't think he should be holding any type of job at all whatsoever.
Well, he believes in ghosts and goblins, as many people in the Republican Party across the country do. But those beliefs in this particular case are making him really harmful to children in direct and indirect ways. Exorcism, giving children away that you've adopted completely outside of the adoption system to someone who allegedly raped them. This is a guy who disgusts me. Every video I see of him freaks me out. I mean, in a serious way, Lewis, when you see this guy give interviews, it is freaky.
I think we're just scratching the surface here. I think there is some sinister stuff happening, and we may not learn about it, but I hope we do.
Thoughts on this? Tweet me, twitter.com/dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is mostly funded by our audience. If you enjoy the show, consider throwing a few dollars a month our way at davidpakman.com/membership. You'll get great member benefits, and you'll be supporting alternatives to homogenous corporate media. Nothing better than that. davidpakman.com/membership. And today's new member of the day is John Blaskovich. And John is joined by Mark Halks, who has been inducted as of a day or two ago into the David Pakman Show Membership Hall of Fame. Mark has been with us for 4 years, the length of one presidential term, and he now gets a free David Pakman Show apparel item of his choice. Mark, make sure to email us. Let us know what you would like. We will ship it out to you at no charge. And of course, congrats to John Blaskovich as well, who is a member of the day today. Let's get into Hatriot Mail. We have a doozy for you today.
Hatriot Mail, your break from the tyranny of unbiased, independent media. Because knowledge and information are just communist conspiracies. Hatriot Mail, written by patriots who hate David Pakman.
Right.
Because America. And because freedom.
Oftentimes I have a little introduction to the week's Hatriot Mail. This week I have no introduction. Let's just listen and see if we can figure it out.
You liberal piece of sheep shit. Guns and the ability to defend your home and persons is the starting line of freedom. I hope your anti-gun ass has your family raped in front of your eyes. Bet your opinion would change. Actually, maybe not. You would blame the cops for not getting there faster. Goddamn you ignorant piece of shit. Keep your mouths shut and go bang a gay guy. Thanks.
Yeah, you know, at first it was a pretty aggressive gun fetishist type video, type message rather. And at the end, they just couldn't resist Lewis throwing in the homophobic stuff, go bang a gay guy. It's almost like a compulsion. They have to include that.
It does seem to be. It's just, it's kind of like the icing on the cake. It's not really a complete Hatriot Mail if you don't at least hint at something along those lines.
Yeah, seemingly cannot resist throwing that in there. That's Hatriot Mail. I completely disagree with the entire message contained there with regard to police and guns and the whole thing. But it is fascinating to hear from these individuals. We were actually, Lewis, in Arizona for the last few days, and lots of Hatriots there that we had run-ins with. We should actually probably talk about it on an upcoming bonus show.
I think that would be wise. Yes, I will discuss that on the very next bonus show.
Fox News has done it again. Usually the propaganda and lies from Fox News impacts U.S. conservatives. It starts a vicious cycle of talking points. It creates new fake non-scandals, but it doesn't always have international implications. That changed the other day when Fox so-called News's so-called expert military analyst, who's a former U.S. Army Major General named Robert Scales, decided to go on Fox Business, which is kind of like the slightly even more paranoid and ridiculous little sister of the Fox News channel, and say, hey, you know what? The U.S. should start killing Russians. Here's what he had to say.
It's game, set, and match in the Ukraine. The only way the United States can have any effect in this region and turn the tide is to start killing Russians by killing so many Russians that even Putin's media can't hide the fact that Russians are returning to the motherland in body bags.
The U.S. killing Russians might also be known colloquially as war with Russia, not the language that the former Major General chose to use. Whatever your position is about Russia's belligerence in the situation with Ukraine, for former military officials to suggest starting to simply kill Russians is just as belligerent, isn't it, Lewis?
I think it's belligerent. I think it's irresponsible. Russians are already dying. You know, if their media is hiding that, that's one thing. I mean, we seem to be helping, you know, the Ukrainians in some ways, but all-out war, I mean, we have some evidence to suggest that Putin may want this, and I don't think that helps anything.
And when he says we should start killing Russians, does he mean Russian people? Does he mean Russian soldiers? Does he mean people like Vladimir Putin and his supporters? Which Russians do we kill, or does it not even matter to him? And this actually reminded me of the fact that we've had somewhere between, I don't know, 10 and 50 years of disastrous right-wing foreign policy decisions. So we certainly don't need these ideas from Robert Scales being given to anybody, but they would be in line with much of what the U.S. has done.
That being said, he is probably right when he says that the only real effect we could have on that region, or perhaps the only way we could turn the tide for Ukraine, is to start killing Russians.
Yeah, probably more Russians than he's willing to have to kill. Russia is now investigating Scales, and according to several reports, they might be pursuing criminal charges against the retired general. Obviously, that is not going to turn into anything significant, but this was an optional gaffe. Why even create a situation where we have former high-ranking military officials drawing attention to themselves in this negative way? What's the gain from this that would even be a possible gain?
Maybe there isn't one. Maybe this is just his opinion, and he thinks that we should be killing Russians. Of course, I think it's a terrible idea, and I'm sure most Americans would agree with that. Going to war is not going to be a good thing.
It was initially reported that the Oklahoma House passed a bill restricting marriage just to religious people. Okay, so the initial reports were the bill would restrict the right to marry to people of faith. It would mandate that all marriage licenses be approved by members of the clergy. This is House Bill 1125. It's, of course, sponsored by a Republican named Todd Russ. It's outrageous. It's a radical proposal. It would basically end secular marriage in Oklahoma. It's obviously a religious test. It's an establishment of religion by the state, if I've ever seen one. But I looked more deeply into the bill, and it's even more insane than this. If you look at page 9 of House Bill 1125, it actually says, quote, an ordained or authorized preacher of the gospel, priest, or other ecclesiastical dignitary, or a rabbi who's at least 18 years old are required for a marriage. That's going well beyond even people of faith. You've got to be a Christian or a Jew. Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, certainly, I mean, atheists, of course, they're just trash in the eyes of people like Todd Russ. They also can't get married according to the detail of this law.
It's an interesting one. I guess if Oklahoma seems like the right place for it. They've been making headlines for quite some time now.
Not that you needed us to tell you this, though, but this, you know what this is about, right, Lewis?
Or what this particular bill is about?
Yeah, what is
it's
it
about
really
gay marriage.
about? It's, of course, about gay marriage.
Yeah.
Of course. Now, the Senate will hopefully kill this, but it is about gay marriage. Under the legislation, atheists and others not wanting to be married by a religious official could file an affidavit through the court clerk's office claiming a common law marriage. Gay people would not be able to do that. So by requiring this religious marriage, which presumably the clergy they've outlined wouldn't be able to do, and without legal gay marriage on common law for gay people, it essentially makes it impossible for gay people to get married. And if you're going to tie marriage to religion, then we should definitely remove the tax exemption from churches. That'll never happen, but I also don't think this bill will ever be made into law.
No, and if it does, I think it would probably be struck down shortly thereafter.
Yeah, I have to assume that at some point, someone in the appeals process would realize that this is completely unconstitutional. And I'm hoping that by June, we have a positive outcome from the Supreme Court on the issue of state bans against same-sex marriage, which would go a long way at combating any of this wasted taxpayer money. So much money spent on this nonsense, which sooner or later is going to be completely moot. Let's take a break. Next, Luke Vargas live from Israel.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
For more coverage of the Israeli elections, I'm joined by Luke Vargas, United Nations correspondent for Talk Radio News Service. He's joined us from Jordan, Poland, Colombia, Ukraine, Tunisia, and Italy. Maybe some other place I'm forgetting as well. So Luke, we talked about the results. We talked about some of the pre-election statements made by Benjamin Netanyahu, who ultimately came out victorious. Break down the campaign pitches more broadly that we were seeing.
Let's start with Netanyahu's pitch. I think it's a very safe assumption, and analysts here would confirm that his campaign really was primarily focused on issues of security, on emphasizing the outside foreign threats to Israel. And, you know, in those pre-election polls, as recently as Friday, which was the last day they could legally be released, many were saying that that was a mistake when those polls were showing him almost across the board trailing his opposition. The implication was that he really ought to have focused more on the economic and socioeconomic issues that the opposition had made a center point in their campaign. Instead, Netanyahu really stuck to the security issue. And I think with his back against the ropes, the way he changed his message in the final days is what put him over the top. On Sunday evening, I was in Tel Aviv for a rally with about 25,000 people. They weren't all supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu, but they were generally supporters of right-wing political parties that constitute his current coalition in government. And what he did then, and his press people were touting this, that he was going to shake up the script to introduce sort of the closing arguments for his campaign. And boy, did he ever. He didn't just tweak the script, he sort of threw out the script. He reversed, the biggest thing he did was reverse his position on the issue of the Palestinian question. He basically said at that rally that so long as I'm prime minister, I will not allow for the creation of an independent Palestinian state. that was very warmly received by people in that crowd, many of whom said, we suspected this is what he had actually believed all along. So to hear him say it, to hear him say it with such conviction, actually sort of made us think, maybe he's a better spokesperson for some of the ideas that we hold in the Israeli political right than our own parties. That's one of the reasons he gained a lot of that surprise support at the 11th hour. And he also went on the next day sort of doubling down. He came close to where I am right now in East Jerusalem to a very controversial settlement where I believe construction began in 2007 under his stewardship. And he said then that he will actually accelerate the construction of new settlements during his next time in office. And finally, what he did on election day actually seemed to, draw the most criticism, but may have actually helped him the most by getting out the vote. Is he texted his supporters in a mass text and also posted a Facebook message saying essentially that the Arab Israeli population is coming out to the polls in droves. He didn't use the phrase Israeli Arab. He just said the Arabs are coming to the polls in droves, and that his opposition on the left was helping to bus them to the polling places. This drew strong rebuke from the State Department as well as from many of the opposition campaigns here in Israel. But it may well have been part of a broader strategy to help sort of mobilize his base, to get them fearful of what would happen if they didn't go out and vote for him. And boy, it looked like it worked.
Yeah, it certainly seems to have worked. And how did this compare with the platform of Isaac Herzog from the Zionist Union?
Well, he's formerly of a Labor Party. It's more of a message of socioeconomic issues. They stress social welfare. The statistics aren't good. There has been a rise in child, the number of children in Israel living in poverty. The price of housing has gone up really dramatically here, such that even otherwise upwardly mobile urban professionals are struggling to get land or to buy houses. Those are issues that the Zionist Union were looking to emphasize under Isaac Herzog. He had also sort of made an argument that a lot of the security issues that Benjamin Netanyahu was warning about so much would actually be fixed in a way or minimized if the tensions with Palestine were relaxed. Herzog was very much in favor of continuing negotiations with Palestinians, finding ways to help engage them and also intensify their diplomatic commitment to the two-state solution and continuing peace talks. And it's even interesting. The party name, Zionist Union, was a name chosen by Herzog because he believed that members of the Israeli political right had actually co-opted this term. He says, Zionism essentially belongs to all Israelis. That we don't think the far right has a monopoly on that term. So in many ways, the goal of the opposition was to inject economic issues into the discussion. It didn't happen, at least in the home stretch, when, again, Netanyahu really seemed to focus more on his traditional strengths of his campaign, security issues, and of course, foreign threats, as we saw with that speech to Congress. Yeah,
and the concept of progressive Zionism is one that is completely lost on or just foreign or unknown to many American progressives who don't understand the progressive pro-Israeli view. And it was very interesting to see someone like Isaac Herzog kind of fill that role during the campaign, ultimately, of course, not coming out victorious. And now that we have Benjamin Netanyahu in again, is it safe to assume, based on what he said about a Palestinian state, that it's unlikely to see much progress in terms of real peace talks?
We could say this harms the negotiations, but that would be hiding the fact that the negotiations didn't really seem to be going anywhere before these comments from Netanyahu. What I do think it's safe to say, though, is that this has given the Palestinians, at least with regard to their quest to seek statehood at the United Nations, to join more international organizations like the International Criminal Court, to pursue crimes against humanity or war crimes charges against Israel, extra momentum. We've already heard from Palestine's lead negotiator that they are going to accelerate their efforts for that statehood bid at the United Nations. And I've also spoken to people today who say the language used by Netanyahu in characterizing the Israeli Arab population just in the past few days has actually sort of helped to galvanize international support. It really draws the distinctions, between religions in this part of the world, which is something that they've been trying to draw attention to for a long time. The fact that they feel they're on the receiving end of sort of discriminatory rhetoric. If they needed any proof, I think many people will be pointing for years to come to some of the language that Netanyahu used in the waning hours, really, of this campaign, which I think, again, will speak, in some ways, to help the Palestinian cause in international organizations like the United Nations.
And tell us more about how that Arab population did vote. I mean, 1 out of 5 Israelis is Arab. Benjamin Netanyahu, as you said, scaring his base into voting by talking about the number of Arabs that were voting. How did they vote?
You're right. It's 21% of the Israeli population. And for a long time, the Arab parties in this country, and there are 4 main ones, 3 actually, and one is an Arab Jewish party, have been really struggling to even make it into the Knesset, to the parliament, because they are right up on what the Knesset has imposed as an electoral threshold. So if you don't reach that amount, you're not eligible to even join the parliament. What they did last year was raise that threshold to 3.25%. This is something passed through the parliament, and many of the Arab party spokespeople I talked to and activists said this was a deliberate attempt to try and marginalize them, to try to exclude them from the parliament. And so what they did, basically born of political necessity, was band together for the first time. They created what is called the Joint List. They actually dropped the word Arab, sort of as a PR term to try and not emphasize the fact that it was an Arab coalition. They called themselves the Joint List, and it really paid off. They sort of papered over their political differences, though, again, they do exist. The 4 parties here span everything from Islamist political groups to a communist party. So there are divides, but they decided again, to ensure the fact that they could even remain relevant and stay in the Knesset, that they would form a joint ticket. And they received what looks to be 13 or 14 seats in the Knesset, which would make them the 3rd largest voting bloc within Parliament, an extraordinary result. It's a story I profiled on the day of the election. I went to East Jerusalem, which one neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah, which is predominantly or historically Arab neighborhood that has been the scene of a lot of protests over the last few years, and talked to voters there, and a number of them, were willing to say they voted for the Joint List. But I did come across, rather unexpectedly, a huge current that I hadn't even really realized, and I maybe should have foreseen. Well, a lot of people saying, look, any vote for even a party like the Joint List in the Knesset is an endorsement of the occupation. East Jerusalem is, after all, and specifically Sheikh Jarrah in this case, where the Palestinians would like their capital to be an independent Palestinian state. And when I brought this up, the fact that I had held, interviews with people on the street in East Jerusalem, one of the, members of the new Knesset, who has actually been elected now by the Joint List, told me very clearly, we are not campaigning in East Jerusalem. People there, believe this is occupied territory. We believe it's occupied territory, and so we're not even trying to advertise to them. If they want to vote for us, fine, that's good. But we are not courting them, because we do realize that if they were to vote for us, they would feel like they were betraying their own instincts, that it would be in some ways an endorsement of the Israeli policy, they say, of occupation. Again, an amazing angle on this story I hadn't even realized when I sort of walked into one of the most sensitive neighborhoods for this issue in the whole country.
Yeah, certainly an angle I would take issue with on a few different fronts, but probably a conversation for a different day. We're going to continue following this Joint List coalition. We will continue following the Benjamin Netanyahu re-election, as well as whether his coalition continues to be so influenced by the more extreme religious elements of the Israeli Knesset. Luke Vargas, United Nations correspondent for Talk Radio News Service, joining us from Jerusalem, Israel today. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you so much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Another delusional Republican religious right-winger has equated gay marriage to handing over Jews to Nazis. Speaking at a Tea Party event in Orlando, Matt Staver, he's the chairman of the Christian conservative law firm Liberty Counsel, said he would not obey a Supreme Court ruling in favor of marriage equality, which we're hoping for June or July, in the same way that he would have refused to hand over a Jew in Nazi Germany. This offends me not only as a Jew, but it also offends me as a straight ally of the LGBT community, because their rights are being turned into a political football time and time again. I have the audio, I have the video of Matt Staver. Take a listen.
When Martin Luther King Jr. was in the Birmingham jail, he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. Some of the pastors said, Martin, why do you obey some laws and not others? He goes, well, there's two kinds of laws. There's just laws. Those are earthly laws that are in conformance with God's law. You've got to obey those. There's unjust laws. Those are earthly laws that are contrary to God's law. You have a duty to disobey. Now, you also have to be ready to pay the consequences, because the civil government wrath is going to be poured out on you. But as a believer, you cannot obey something that's contrary to God's law. You know, and we would easily say, well, what would happen if the government forced you to turn over a Jew in Nazi Germany? Well, all of us would say, yeah, you know, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't listen to that. Well, you know, we're about ready to walk into that moment.
It's also utterly ludicrous to compare himself to Martin Luther King, but let's skip that for now. I tried super hard. I sat down and I said, let me see if I can think of any ways in which men getting married is like sending Jews to their deaths at the hands of genocidal maniacs. I could not, Louis, come up with a single way in which the two things were related.
We don't need to point that out. I think our viewers understand that. I think that the comparisons to Nazi Germany and the Holocaust are always just used in whatever situation to make people afraid. That's really what is at the heart of it.
Well, and they've successfully, these anti-gay Christian bigots have these total victim complexes, and it strikes me as amazing that they can concoct a narrative about how they are supposedly being persecuted by those who they are actually persecuting, if that makes any sense.
Right. They're the victims. They are being their religious freedom is being violated because they cannot persecute and condemn and damn the LGBT community.
I'm taking a stand, a different stand, as an ally of the LGBT community with an analogy that makes much more sense to me. I'm not going to turn my back on gay people, effectively turning them over to an anti-gay mob that would be led by the likes of Matt Staver, in the same way that I wouldn't turn over a Jew to Nazis. If we have to make an analogy to Nazis, Louis, I think that's a much more apt one.
I think if he could stand in front of the country like Hitler stood in front of Germany and started with, the oration, creating fear, fomenting hate, I think that he would do the exact same thing to gays that Hitler did to the Jews.
All right, Pat Robertson has answered a fake question from one of our viewers. Of course, we have no way to confirm this, but I got an email from one of our viewers saying, hey, David, I'm Jay. I got a question into Pat Robertson as Ann. He read it. He answered it. You got to play it on your show. As I mentioned, we have no way to independently confirm this, but we've been talking about this for a while, and it appears to have happened. A fake question. This is total satire. Let's take a listen.
Okay, this is Ann who says, Dear Pat, not so long ago, my son came out of the closet, and a year later he told us he was becoming an atheist. I want him to follow the path of Christ, but it's so hard. What can I do about it?
Well, Ann, you can do a couple of things. First of all, you cannot go along and say, I agree with your lifestyle. And so don't be an enabler anymore. If he's a drug addict, you don't enable people to continue in their drug habit. But you let him know you love him. Let him know God loves him. And you hold out that love. So it's a very difficult relationship. You don't want to shun him. You want to have love, but you've got to let him know that you don't approve of the things that he's doing. And you just let him know that there's always a welcome, that you're always there, that you're his mother, and you'll look after him because there's a bond there that has not been severed.
Yeah, don't enable gayness like you would enable drug addiction. He at least does say you should still love your kid, even if it turns out that they're gay. And he also says that your son's sexual orientation shouldn't sever the bond between son and mother. So other than treating one's innate sexual orientation like an addiction to drugs, Pat Robertson is kind of on point here with some of the things he's saying.
This, I think, is the most level-headed, logical, reasonable, and compassionate approach to being anti-gay that you can possibly have.
Yeah,
and
it's insane, and it has no connection at all to the actual science of it.
No.
But for the we're setting such a low bar from these guys that it actually sounds like compassion.
Can you imagine if parents and siblings across the world, instead of killing or kicking out of the house and brutalizing the family members who come out of the closet, if they just said, you know what? I love you. You're great. I just don't agree with this. I think the world would be a much better place.
Or the version Pat Robertson probably would like to see, which is, son, God loves you, and thus I love you as well. But he also views you as an abomination unto himself, that something so wretched was created in spite of what God created, or something like that, right? That would be more the Pat Robertson version, which actually sounds a little less compassionate, but it's not advocating violence against them. I guess that's at least something from Pat Robertson. It's actually sickening how low the bar is set, that we find something like this incredibly offensive, but not quite as offensive as we've heard from some others.
Right. So if you're not going to believe the realities of this, if you're going to be anti-gay, do it in this way. I guess that's the message.
Yeah, stop short of violence and throwing your children to the curb. If you have to completely damage them psychologically, at least allow it to happen with a roof over their heads. Just disgusting, Lewis. I mean, it's truly, truly incredible. But I still remain hopeful that a positive Supreme Court decision about gay marriage will start to make this less of an issue, even amongst the religious.
It will. It'll still be an issue. They will fight it for a very long time. But I think reason and logic is winning.
We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. The Willacoochee pastor, fake, real, is back. Let's take a listen.
This is Elder Tommy Tyler from Willacoochee again. I'm calling about your comments on the homosexuality, chosen or is it inborn?
Right.
Now, Mr. Packman, I know the devil has your mind and also has Lewis's mind too, and it's his grip. But think about this for a minute. If homosexuality was chosen, why do we not have one homosexual in Willacoochee? Explain that. This is a chosen lifestyle under the influence of Satan. Under the influence of Satan, it is not born. Now, we had a fella here in Willacoochee we thought was a homosexual. He used to listen to public radio and read some of those fancy science magazines at the library, but he moved. So I can say we do not have one single sodomite living within Willacoochee. Praise the living Lamb of God.
All right, Lewis, are you now ready to concede that this is satire?
Well, Willacoochee, Georgia, in 2010, I guess had a population of about 1,400. So maybe he's right. Maybe there isn't one gay person in Willacoochee, Georgia. But no, all joking aside, I'm starting to think that maybe this is satire, but I'm still not 100% convinced.
Yeah, this voicemail does it for me. I am now convinced for sure, and I've been convinced for a while. I still believe we are going to get emails or voicemails from people who are convinced that this is real. I don't believe it is. I just cannot believe that this is real. On today's bonus show, Tanzania arrests witch doctors for targeting those with albinism. A flying car will go on sale in 2017. We'll follow up about a couple of stories from last week. Lewis hosts the bonus show, and I am merely the sidekick. You can get access to the bonus show and lots of great other member benefits by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.